Dresden, February the 13th, 1945. The city burns. Refugees pack the streets. Soldiers pass through on their way to collapsing fronts. Families huddle in ancient cellars beneath baroque palaces. No one expects what comes next. At 10 that night, the air raid sirens scream across the Elbe Valley. Within minutes, 772 Royal Air Force heavy bombers appear over the city centre. They carry incendiaries, high explosives, a new tactical approach designed not to destroy factories or military targets, but to create something never seen before in human history: a firestorm. The crews receive their briefings hours earlier. The target is Dresden, the Florence of the Elbe, a city untouched by major raids, a place of refugees, hospitals, baroque architecture, and cultural treasures dating back centuries. Intelligence reports indicate minimal air defenses, minimal fighter presence, perfect conditions for what Bomber Command plans to unleash. By midnight, the city centre no longer exists. 15 square kilometres burn simultaneously. Winds exceed 150 kilometres per hour. Temperatures reach 1,000 degrees Celsius in some streets. Oxygen vanishes from entire neighbourhoods. Asphalt melts. Sandstone walls explode from the heat. Tens of thousands die in the first 3 hours. The second wave arrives at dawn. American bombers finish what the British began. This is not the story of a military operation. This is the story of what happens to a city when modern industrial warfare decides to demonstrate its absolute power, when the line between military necessity and mass annihilation disappears entirely, when a single night transforms 7 centuries of human achievement into ash and rubble and charred corpses stacked in the streets. Dresden stands at the intersection of colliding realities in February 1945. Germany faces total defeat. The Red Army advances from the east. The Western Allies close from the Tube, west. The Reich collapses. Hitler's regime enters its final spasm of destruction and denial, and Dresden somehow remains largely intact, a city swollen with refugees fleeing the Soviet advance, a place where people believe they might be safe because nothing of military value exists here. No tank factories, no U-boat pens, no synthetic oil plants, just art, architecture, culture, history. The Allies see something else, a transportation hub funneling German troops toward the Eastern Front, a city aiding the enemy war effort, a target that will demonstrate to Stalin that the Western Allies contribute meaningfully to defeating Germany, a chance to show what strategic bombing can achieve when unleashed without restraint against an undefended urban centre. What unfolds over 48 hours reveals the ultimate logic of total war. The destruction of Dresden becomes a test case, a demonstration, a warning to enemies present and future about what happens when industrial nations commit every resource to annihilation. The methods used this night will be studied, debated, condemned, and defended for decades. The moral questions raised will never find satisfying answers. The camera footage that survives shows things human beings were never meant to witness. Corpses shriveled to the size of children by heat so intense it boils the water from human tissue. Survivors with lungs seared by superheated air. Refugees who flee into the Elbe to escape the flames, only to freeze to death in the February cold. Mass graves that take weeks to fill. A cultural capital of Central Europe reduced to a moonscape of rubble and ash in less than 2 days. Strategic necessity or war crime? Military target or civilian slaughter? Justified response to German aggression or descent into barbarism? These questions haunt the Allied bombing campaign's legacy. Dresden crystallizes every argument, every moral compromise, every rationalization that allows civilized nations to incinerate cities full of civilians and call it victory. The people of Dresden do not debate these questions on February the 13th. They run, they burn, they suffocate, they die by the thousands. Those who survive emerge into a city that no longer exists. 700 years of history erased in 14 hours of sustained bombardment. The baroque jewel of Saxony transformed into Germany's largest crematorium. One survivor later writes, "Hell came to earth that night, and we learned that human beings can create torments worse than any devil ever imagined. What happens when the machinery of modern war turns its full attention to destroying a single city? What remains when the bombs stop falling and the fires finally burn out? What does a place become when everything that made it recognizable disappears in a single night?" The uncensored footage from Dresden provides answers no one wants to see. Dresden exists for 7 centuries before the night that erases it. The city rises along the Elbe River in Saxony, built by Augustus the Strong in the 18th century as a showcase of baroque splendor. The Frauenkirche Cathedral dominates the skyline with its massive stone dome. The Zwinger Palace houses art collections rivaling anything in Europe. The Semper Opera hosts world premiere performances. Elegant bridges span the river. Tree-lined avenues connect neighborhoods of ornate architecture and carefully planned gardens. Painters call it the Florence of the Elbe. Tourists arrive by the thousands each year to marvel at what centuries of wealth and culture produce. By early 1945, all of that remains physically intact. Unlike Berlin, Hamburg, Cologne, and dozens of other German cities reduced to rubble by years of Allied bombing, Dresden survives largely untouched. No major raids strike the city. No sustained campaign turns its neighborhoods into wastelands. The baroque architecture stands. The museums remain open. The cultural life continues, however diminished by 6 years of total war. The population tells a different story. In 1939, 630,000 people call Dresden home. By February 1945, that number swells to well over 1 million. Refugees flood into Saxony from the east, fleeing the Red Army's advance through Poland and into Germany itself. Trains arrive daily packed with families carrying whatever possessions they can manage. Columns of horse-drawn wagons clog the roads leading into the city. People sleep in parks, in train stations, in church basements, anywhere they can find shelter from the February cold. The refugees bring stories that terrify those who hear them. Soviet soldiers exact revenge for 4 years of German atrocities in Russia. Entire villages disappear. Women face mass rape. Civilians die by the thousands as the Red Army sweeps west. Prussia empties. Pomerania burns. Silesia falls. The human tide flows toward what people hope might be safety in the heart of Germany. Dresden becomes a sanctuary for hundreds of thousands, convinced that if anywhere might escape the war's final convulsions, it must be this city of culture and beauty. The strategic situation makes such hopes delusional. Dresden sits 120 kilometers from the nearest Eastern Front positions in mid-February. The Red Army advances between 20 and 30 kilometers per week. Simple mathematics reveals that Soviet forces will reach the Elbe Valley within weeks, perhaps days, if the German defenses collapse entirely. The city lies directly in the path of the greatest military offensive in human history. More immediately relevant to Dresden's fate, the city functions as a major transportation hub. 7 main railway lines converge here. Troops heading east pass through Dresden's marshalling yards. Supplies move through the city toward collapsing German positions. Military. Hospitals fill with wounded evacuated from the Eastern Front. Administrative offices coordinate the defense of southeastern Germany. The regime operates a Zeiss optical factory producing gun sights and targeting equipment. Several smaller workshops manufacture components for military equipment. None of these facilities justify what bomber command plans. The military value of Dresden pales compared to dozens of more significant targets. But the city offers something else that matters in February 1945, an opportunity, a chance to demonstrate the full destructive power of strategic bombing against an undefended urban center, a way to show Stalin that the Western Allies contribute meaningfully to Germany's defeat, a test of new tactical approaches designed to create maximum destruction with minimum effort. British and American intelligence analyzes Dresden for months before the attack. Reconnaissance photographs map the city centre's layout. Analysts identify the densest residential areas. Experts study the medieval street patterns, the concentration of wooden-framed buildings in the Altstadt Old Town, the baroque architecture's vulnerability to fire. Everything points toward ideal conditions for incendiary attack: narrow streets, densely packed structures, minimal firefighting capacity, negligible air defenses, hundreds of thousands of people crammed into combustible buildings. The decision to destroy Dresden comes from the highest levels. Churchill approves. Portal at the Air Ministry endorses it. Harris at Bomber Command enthusiastically implements it. The Americans agree to participate. The target date is set for mid-February, when weather conditions favor large-scale operations. The method is decided. Area bombing designed to create a firestorm. The goal is stated openly in planning documents: to cause maximum destruction and casualties, to break German morale, to demonstrate Allied power, to assist Soviet operations by destroying transportation, infrastructure. No one in Dresden knows any of this. The city continues its wartime existence through early February. Ration cards provide increasingly meager food supplies. Blackout regulations darken the streets at night. Air raid shelters exist, but receive little use because no major raids ever come. People adapt to shortages, to fear, to uncertainty about the future. Refugees integrate as best they can into a city straining under impossible burdens. Life continues, because what else can people do? The weather remains cold. Snow falls intermittently through early February. The Elbe flows brown and swollen with winter runoff. The baroque facades look as magnificent as ever, though paint peels and maintenance degenerates after 6 years of war. Inside the buildings, families crowd together against the cold. Food grows scarce. Fuel for heating becomes impossible to find. But the city stands. The architecture endures. Dresden remains Dresden. Air raid sirens sound occasionally when Allied bomber streams pass overhead en route to other targets: Berlin to the north, Chemnitz to the south, Leipzig to the northwest. The bombers fly over Dresden and continue to other cities. Dresden watches from below as other places burn. The sense grows that perhaps this city might be spared. Perhaps its cultural significance protects it. Perhaps the war will end before the bombs arrive here. The refugees particularly cling to this hope. They flee east, expecting violence, death, and brutality from Soviet forces. They arrive in Dresden seeking safety from a war that consumes everything in its path. The city represents survival, a place where ancient stones might shield them from modern weapons, where culture and beauty might mean something even in the middle of total war. February the 13th begins like any other wartime day in Dresden. Cold, grey, people queue for rations. Refugees search for shelter. Trains arrive and depart. The city functions as well as any German city can, in the Reich's final weeks. Nothing suggests that in 12 hours everything will change forever. One woman later recalls, "We believed Dresden was too beautiful to destroy, that even in war, some things remain sacred." A railway worker remembers, "The trains never stopped coming, packed with people running from the Russians, and we never imagined we were running towards something worse." By late afternoon on the 13th, the weather begins to clear. The cloud cover that blankets Central Europe for days starts to break apart. Visibility improves. Bomber Command's meteorologists in England note the favourable conditions. The operation receives final approval. 772 Lancaster heavy bombers prepare to take off from bases across eastern England. Their target, Dresden city centre. Their mission, create a firestorm. Their payload, thousands of tons of high explosives and incendiaries designed to turn a city into an inferno. Dresden has no idea what approaches from the west. No meaningful fighter defences protect the city. Anti-aircraft guns were moved to more strategic locations months ago. Radar coverage is minimal. Civil defense consists of inadequate shelters and poorly equipped fire brigades. The city stands naked before what comes next. As darkness falls on February the 13th, families settle in for another cold winter night. Refugees crowd into temporary shelters. Children sleep. Adults worry about food, about fuel, about what tomorrow might bring. No one worries about bombers. Dresden never gets bombed. At 10:13 that night, the air raid sirens begin to wail across the city. The sirens scream at 10:13 on the night of February the 13th. People react slowly. Dresden experiences air raid warnings regularly as bomber streams pass overhead toward other targets. The routine becomes familiar. Sirens sound. People move to shelters. Aircraft engines drone overhead. The bombers continue elsewhere. All clear sounds. Life resumes. No one expects tonight to differ. Families gather children and move toward basements. Refugees in temporary shelters crowd into cellars beneath schools and churches. The elderly who survived the First World War remember different threats and move with less urgency. Young mothers clutch infants and descend stairs into ancient vaulted chambers beneath baroque buildings. The shelters fill, but not with panic. Not yet. At 10:22, the first wave of Lancasters reaches Dresden airspace. The Pathfinder force arrives first. Mosquito aircraft equipped with specialized navigation equipment identify the aiming point in the city, center. The target zone encompasses the Altstadt, the medieval old town where narrow streets wind between buildings dating back centuries. Wooden frameworks support plaster facades. Roof timbers age for hundreds of years until they become perfectly dry kindling. The streets form a maze of combustible material packed into 15 square kilometers. The Pathfinders drop magnesium flares that ignite at altitude and drift down on parachutes, turning night into artificial day. The flares hang suspended above the city, illuminating the Elbe's curves, the baroque domes and spires, the geometric patterns of streets radiating from the altmarked central square. The light is brilliant, ghastly, beautiful in its terrible clarity. Then the target indicators fall. Red and green pyrotechnic markers explode across the Altstadt, creating aiming points visible for kilometers. The main bomber force follows the Pathfinders by minutes. 244 Lancasters approach in waves, each carrying between 4 and 8 tons of bombs. The bomb loads mix high explosives with incendiaries in carefully calculated ratios designed to achieve a specific effect. The high explosives drop first. 4,000-pound blockbusters hit buildings and detonate with massive concussive force. Roofs collapse, windows shatter throughout entire neighborhoods, walls crack and tumble into streets. The explosions create perfect conditions for what follows. Buildings stand gutted and exposed, their interiors vulnerable, their wooden frameworks splintered and accessible to air. The incendiaries fall next. Hundreds of thousands of thermite and phosphorus bombs rain down across the shattered city center. Each 4-pound magnesium incendiary burns at approximately 2,000 degrees Celsius. Nothing can extinguish them. Water makes them burn hotter. Sand sometimes smothers them, but requires immediate action. And there are too many, falling too fast, starting fires in too many places simultaneously. Within minutes, hundreds of fires ignite across the Altstadt. The carefully planned bomb distribution ensures that fires start in every building, every block, every street in the target zone. Individual fires merge into larger conflagrations. Larger fires combine into massive blazes that consume entire neighborhoods. The temperature rises. The air begins to move. People in the shelters feel the first tremors from nearby explosions. Dust falls from ancient ceiling vaults. Children cry. Adults try to remain calm. The bombs keep falling. The explosions grow closer. The earth shakes with each impact. Then the sound changes. The sharp crack of high explosives gives way to a different noise. A roar. A hurricane wind. The firestorm begins. The fires create their own weather system. Superheated air rises rapidly from hundreds of burning buildings. Cooler air rushes in from surrounding areas to replace it. The wind velocity increases, 50 kilometers per hour, 70, 100, 150 kilometers per hour. The wind feeds oxygen to the flames. The flames grow hotter. The hotter flames pull in more air. The cycle accelerates beyond any firefighter's ability to control or even comprehend. People emerge from shelters expecting to fight fires and find a landscape transformed into something from nightmare. The wind knocks them from their feet. Flying debris becomes lethal projectiles. Burning embers fill the air like horizontal snow. The heat makes breathing painful even hundreds of meters from the nearest flames. Those who try to reach water pumps cannot advance against the wind. Those who bring buckets watch the water evaporate before reaching the flames. The firestorm reaches its peak intensity around 11 at night. The entire Altstadt burns simultaneously. Temperatures in some streets exceed 1,000 degrees Celsius. Asphalt melts and runs in rivers. Sandstone blocks that stood for centuries explode from thermal stress. Metal lampposts soften and bend. Glass melts from window frames. The baroque facades that defined Dresden for generations blister, crack and collapse into the inferno below. The cellars become death traps. Fires consume the oxygen in the buildings above. Carbon monoxide seeps down into shelters through ventilation shafts and cracks in walls. People suffocate without visible wounds. Others flee rising temperatures only to encounter the firestorm outside. The choice becomes impossible. Stay and suffocate. Run and burn. Those who run describe scenes that will haunt them forever. Human torches stagger through streets, clothing and hair aflame, skin peeling from bones. Children separated from parents scream names that disappear in the roar of wind and fire. Elderly who move too slowly simply stop, sit down, and wait for death. Refugees who fled Soviet armies die in German streets, killed by British bombs. The Elbe offers apparent salvation. Thousands flee toward the river, believing water will save them. They reach the banks and plunge in, seeking relief from unbearable heat. The river runs cold in February. Hypothermia sets in within minutes. People too exhausted or injured to swim drift downstream and drown. Those who cling to the banks freeze to death as their clothes ice over. Bodies pile up along the shoreline, some burned, some frozen, all dead. The firestorm consumes everything combustible in the target zone. Hospitals burn with patients still in beds. Churches collapse, burying those who sought sanctuary inside. Schools crammed with refugees become crematoriums. The Frauenkirche Cathedral survived wars and sieges for 2 centuries, burns from within as its wooden interior ignites. The stone dome glows red from the heat inside. It will stand for 2 more days before finally collapsing. The Zwinger Palace burns. Priceless artwork accumulated over centuries goes up in flames. The Semper Opera burns. The Japanese palace burns. The royal castle burns. 700 years of accumulated culture and beauty and human achievement transforms into ash in less than 2 hours. By midnight, the first wave completes its work. The bombers turn west and head back toward England. They leave behind a burning city visible from over 100 kilometers away. The glow illuminates the clouds above Dresden. Pilots in the returning aircraft see it and know they have created something unprecedented in the history of warfare. On the ground, survivors emerge from shelters into a world that no longer resembles the city they knew hours before. Familiar streets disappear beneath rubble. Landmarks vanish. The darkness fills with screams, with calls for help, with the roar of flames, with the crash of collapsing buildings. The smell of burning flesh mixes with smoke and chemical fumes from melted materials never meant to combust. Rescue efforts begin immediately and prove futile. Fire brigades from surrounding towns race toward Dresden and cannot penetrate the heat. Water mains break from explosions and heat stress. Pumps find no pressure. Streets fill with rubble too deep to pass. The wounded outnumber available medical personnel by hundreds to one. The dead already number in the tens of thousands. 3 hours pass. Survivors try to comprehend what happened. Many believe the worst is over. The bombers came. The city burns. Surely nothing more can happen tonight. They begin trying to save what remains, to find family members, to pull wounded from rubble, to fight fires that seem to be diminishing as they consume everything burnable. At 1:30 in the morning on February the 14th, the air raid sirens sound again. The second wave approaches. 529 Lancaster bombers carry fresh loads of high explosives and incendiaries. Their target remains the same, the city centre, the areas already burning. The mission is to ensure complete destruction, to kill rescue workers, to finish what the first wave began. One survivor later testifies, "We thought hell had come and gone, but hell returned at dawn, and we learned that human cruelty has no bottom, no limit, no end." A firefighter recalls, "I watched my city die twice in one night, and I understood then that we had unleashed something we could never control, never stop, never take back." The second wave finds a burning city already devastated beyond recognition. They bomb it anyway. The sirens wail again at 1:30 in the morning. Survivors cannot believe what they hear. Another attack. Impossible. The city already burns. What more can bombers accomplish against a landscape already transformed into an inferno? But the sound grows unmistakable. Aircraft engines drone overhead, hundreds of them. The nightmare has not ended. 529 Lancasters approached Dresden in the pre-dawn darkness of February the 14th. The city centre still burns from the first attack 3 hours earlier. The firestorm diminishes, but continues consuming everything combustible in the Altstadt. Flames leap from building to building across streets, now choked with rubble and corpses. The thermal column of rising air remains visible on the bomber crew's instruments from dozens of kilometers away. The second wave carries orders to bomb the same target zone as the first attack. The aiming point remains the city centre. The loads consist of the same mixture of high, explosives and incendiaries. The tactical objective is stated clearly in crew briefings: ensure complete destruction, leave nothing standing, kill anyone who survived the first attack, prevent any recovery or rescue operations. The Pathfinders drop fresh target indicators at 1:40. The markers fall onto streets already burning, adding new pyrotechnic brilliance to flames that need no additional illumination. The main force follows within minutes. The bombing run begins at 1:50 and continues for 23 minutes of sustained bombardment. The high explosives fall first, as before, but this time they strike a city already gutted and weakened. Buildings damaged in the first attack collapse entirely. Structures that survived with walls intact disintegrate under fresh concussive blasts. Shelters that protected people 3 hours earlier crack open as 1,000-pound bombs penetrate weakened cellars. Underground spaces that offered sanctuary become mass graves as ceiling vaults, collapse and bury hundreds alive. The incendiaries rain down onto ruins still smouldering from the first wave. Fresh fires ignite in areas not completely consumed. Buildings on the periphery of the firestorm zone that escaped the worst of the first attack now burn. The fire spreads outward from the city centre into residential neighbourhoods previously untouched. The destruction zone expands from 15 square kilometres to over 20. People who fled their shelters after the first attack to search for family or fight fires now die in the streets. The bombs fall randomly across the entire target area. A man pulling wounded from rubble disappears in an explosion. A woman searching for her children burns when incendiaries ignite the building she enters. Firefighters from neighbouring towns who rushed to help Dresden die alongside those they came to save. The Grosser Garten Park on the city's eastern edge fills with refugees who fled there, seeking safety in open ground away from burning buildings. Thousands crowd into the park. Families huddle together. Wounded lie on the frozen ground. Parents clutch children. Everyone believes the trees and open space will protect them from the fires consuming the city center 2 kilometers away. The bombers find them anyway. High explosives crater the parkland. Incendiaries ignite the trees. The refugees scatter in panic, running in all directions, seeking shelter that does not exist. Bodies litter the paths between shattered trees. Craters fill with dead and wounded. The park transforms from sanctuary to killing ground in minutes. The Elbe riverbanks likewise offer no safety. Hundreds who survived the first attack, by reaching the water, remain there, too exhausted or injured to move. The second wave drops bombs along both shores. Explosions tear through crowds of survivors huddled on the muddy banks. Bodies already frozen from hours in February cold are blown apart or buried under debris hurled from nearby buildings. The main railway station burns again. The first attack damaged but did not destroy the massive structure. The second wave finishes the job. The steel and glass roof collapses onto platforms packed with refugees who sheltered there. Hospital trains filled with wounded burn on the sidings. Locomotives explode as boilers rupture from heat and blast damage. The marshalling yards become landscapes of twisted metal and burning rail cars. By 2:30 in the morning, the second wave completes its mission and turns for home. The bombers leave behind a city burning even more intensely than before. The firestorm reignites with fresh fuel and spreads into previously undamaged areas. The temperature rises again. The wind velocity increases. The destruction that seemed complete 3 hours ago proves to be merely preparation for worse to come. Dawn arrives around 6 on February the 14th. The winter sun rises over a city that no longer exists. The light reveals what darkness mercifully concealed. Dresden has become a desert of rubble and ash, stretching from horizon to horizon. Where baroque palaces stood 12 hours ago, nothing remains but shattered walls and smoking debris. Where streets wound through medieval neighborhoods, only traces visible in the pattern of rubble indicate where roads once ran. The fires still burn. They will continue burning for days. Entire city blocks remain too hot to approach. Corpses litter every street, every plaza, every public space. Some bodies lie intact, killed by concussion or suffocation. Others are charred beyond recognition. Many are shriveled to half their normal size or less, the water boiled from their tissues by temperatures that exceeded crematorium heat. Children's bodies lie curled in fetal positions. Women clutch infants burned into their arms. The elderly sit against walls where they stop to rest and never rose again. The survivors who emerge into daylight struggle to orient themselves in a cityscape transformed beyond recognition. Familiar landmarks have vanished. Church spires that guided navigation for centuries no longer exist. The street plan disappears beneath meters of rubble. People wander in shock, searching for homes that are simply gone, for family members who will never be found, for some recognizable remnant of the world that existed yesterday. But the destruction is not finished. The second wave departed hours ago, but a third attack prepares to launch from bases in England and France. American bombers, flying fortresses and liberators, over 300 of them, their target, the railway marshalling yards and whatever remains standing in Dresden's city center. The American bombers arrive shortly after noon on February the 14th. The crews expect to find a city. They find a burning wasteland. Smoke rises thousands of meters into the air, obscuring visual navigation. The Norden bomb sites prove useless in the murk. Bombardiers release their loads based on estimated positions, radar, returns, and guesswork. The bombs fall across the eastern and southern districts of Dresden. Residential areas that escaped the night attacks burn now. The few remaining hospitals take direct hits. A clearly marked Red Cross facility explodes, killing patients, doctors, and nurses. Schools converted to emergency shelters collapse. Churches where wounded lie on pews disintegrate. The American attack lasts 24 minutes. Over 700 tons of high explosives and incendiaries fall on a city already destroyed. The military justification becomes nonsensical. The railway yards are cratered ruins. The bridges are down. The roads are impassable. No military movement can occur through Dresden. The city offers no value as a target except as a demonstration of what strategic bombing can accomplish when applied without restraint. By early afternoon on February the 14th, the bombing finally ends. 3 separate attacks over 14 hours, over 3,000 tons of bombs, approximately 1,200 aircraft. The most concentrated aerial assault on a single city in such a brief period in the entire war. The firestorm burns itself out over the following days as it exhausts all combustible material. Fires smolder for weeks in cellars and beneath rubble. The city centre remains too hot to enter for days. When rescue workers finally penetrate the ruins, they find scenes that defy description. Shelters packed with hundreds of bodies, streets where corpses lie in layers, cellars where families died together, their bodies showing no wounds, simply suffocated when the fires consumed all oxygen. The task of recovering and identifying bodies proves impossible. Too many dead, too much destruction, too few surviving personnel, too little equipment. The decision is made to cremate the dead where they lie. Funeral pyres burn in the Altmarkt square for weeks. Workers stack bodies like cordwood and burn them in massive pyres fueled by debris from destroyed buildings. The smoke from burning corpses adds to the pall hanging over the ruins. No accurate count of the dead ever emerges. Estimates range from 25,000 to over 100,000. The true number likely falls somewhere between. Tens of thousands die in the attacks. Tens of thousands more die in the following days and weeks from injuries, exposure, disease, and starvation. Hundreds of thousands who called Dresden home in early February are dead, missing, or fled by month's end. The Frauenkirche Cathedral stands for 2 more days after the bombing, before its stone dome finally collapses on February the 15th. The crash echoes across the ruins. The pile of rubble that remains will sit untouched for nearly 50 years, a monument to what happened here. One rescue worker later writes, "I have seen the face of hell, and it wears the mask of civilization, speaks the language of necessity, and justifies itself with strategic objectives that mean nothing to the dead." A survivor remembers. The city died, and part of us died with it, and what emerged from those ruins was not human anymore, just ghosts walking through a graveyard, pretending to be alive. Dresden burns. The world watches, and the questions that will haunt this moment for generations begin to form in minds not yet ready to confront them. Silence descends over Dresden on February the 15th. The bombers do not return. The fires diminish to smouldering embers. The smoke thins enough to see across the ruins. What remains is a necropolis, a city of the dead stretching across 25 square kilometers of central Dresden. The living move through it like ghosts, searching for things they will never find. The scale of destruction defies comprehension, even for those standing within it. The entire Altstadt no longer exists as a functional urban space. 7 centuries of continuous habitation end in 14 hours. The baroque architecture that defined Dresden vanishes. The Zwinger Palace stands as a burned shell, its walls intact, but everything within consumed. The royal castle is rubble. The Semper Opera is gone. The Japanese palace survives only as fragments of walls. The Kreuzkirche tower still stands, but the church below is gutted. The Katholische Hofkirche cathedral's walls remain, but the interior is destroyed. Building after building reveals the same pattern. Stone or brick exterior walls stand to varying heights. Everything wooden inside has burned completely. Roof timbers, floor joists, staircases, furniture, everything combustible is ash. Some structures retain facades that look almost normal from certain angles, until you see through the empty window frames to blue sky behind. Other buildings collapsed entirely into piles of rubble, indistinguishable from the debris-choked streets around them. The medieval street plan disappears beneath debris. Rubble fills the narrow lanes of the Altstadt to depths of 3 and 4 meters in places. The wider boulevards fare slightly better, but remain impassable to vehicles. Mountains of broken masonry, shattered timber, twisted metal, and pulverized stone block every route into the city centre. The few streets kept partially clear serve only as paths for work crews carrying bodies. Water does not flow. The bombs and fires destroy the water mains throughout the city centre. Broken pipes leak uselessly into the rubble. The Elbe still runs through Dresden, but no functioning system exists to bring water from the river to where people need it. The lack of water prevents any meaningful firefighting. The remaining fires burn until they exhaust their fuel. It also means survivors cannot wash, cannot drink without walking to the river, cannot maintain any semblance of sanitation. Electricity is gone. Gas lines are ruptured and dangerous. Telephone lines are down. The city infrastructure that makes modern urban life possible no longer functions. Dresden, in mid-February 1945, reverts to medieval conditions. No light after dark except from fires, no heat except from burning debris, no communication except face-to-face, no transportation except walking. The Nazi authorities in Dresden struggle to maintain order and begin recovery operations. Gauleiter Martin Mutschmann survives the bombing in a bunker outside the city centre. He issues orders to begin clearing streets and recovering bodies, but the resources to implement those orders barely exist. Most municipal workers are dead, fled, or too traumatized to function. Equipment burns in the attacks. Vehicles have no fuel. The administrative apparatus collapses. The task of body recovery begins within hours of the last bombs falling and continues for weeks. Work crews, many composed of pressed prisoners of war, Hitler Youth members, and surviving civil defense personnel, move systematically through the ruins. They carry stretchers. They bring wagons. They wear cloths over their faces against the stench. The smell of death hangs over Dresden like fog. The bodies appear everywhere. In the streets where people died fleeing the firestorm. In cellars where entire families suffocated together. In the Grosser Garten Park where refugees thought they would be safe. Along the Elbe riverbanks where hundreds froze or drowned. In the railway station beneath the collapsed roof. In hospital ruins. In church basements. In school shelters. Everywhere. The condition of the corpses varies from intact to unrecognizable. Some victims show no external wounds, killed by carbon monoxide poisoning or oxygen deprivation when the firestorm consumed the air. These bodies look almost peaceful, as if the dead simply fell asleep. Other corpses bear horrific burns, skin charred black, limbs contracted into boxer positions by heat that shrinks muscles and tendons. Many bodies are shriveled to a fraction of normal size, the intense heat boiling away water and fat, reducing adults to the dimensions of children. Identification proves impossible for most victims. The heat destroys documents, clothing, any personal effects that might identify individuals. Entire families die together, but which bodies belong to which family cannot be determined. The dead pile up faster than they can be processed. Work crews stack corpses in the Altmarkt Square and other open spaces. The stacks grow to hundreds, then thousands. The decision is made to cremate the dead in mass funeral pyres. No other option exists. The number of dead exceeds the capacity of Dresden's cemeteries by an order of magnitude. No coffins exist. No graves can be dug in frozen February ground fast enough. Disease threatens if bodies remain unburied. The pyres become necessary. Workers construct platforms from debris. They stack bodies carefully at first, trying to maintain some dignity, some respect for the dead. But the numbers overwhelm such efforts. Soon corpses pile onto the pyres in heaps, fuel-soaked wood underneath, more debris on top. The fires burn continuously. The smoke from burning human flesh adds another layer to the pall hanging over the city. The pyres burn for 3 weeks. Estimates suggest 30,000 to 40,000 bodies burn this way in the Altmarkt alone. Other pyres operate elsewhere in the city. The ash and bone fragments are buried in mass graves. Most victims of the Dresden firestorm have no individual grave, no marker, no way for future generations to know who they were or where they rest. Survivors attempt to locate missing family members and find the task hopeless. A woman searches for her 3 children who were in a different shelter. She finds the shelter collapsed, filled with bodies burned beyond recognition. Are her children among the dead? She will never know. A man looks for his elderly parents who refuse to leave their apartment. The building no longer exists. Did they die there? Did they flee? Did they survive? No answers come. The hospitals that remain functional overflow with wounded, burns, crush injuries, respiratory damage from inhaling superheated air, psychological trauma beyond anything medical staff knows how to treat. The doctors and nurses work with almost no supplies, no proper facilities, no hope of evacuating the worst cases. People die in hallways waiting for treatment. Others die during treatment from infections or shock or simply giving up. Refugees who fled to Dresden seeking safety from the Red Army now flee again, this time from the ruins of the city that promised sanctuary. Columns of people move west along roads clogged with military traffic and other refugee groups. They carry what little they salvaged from the bombing. Many carry nothing at all. They walk toward an uncertain future in a collapsing Reich that offers no safety anywhere. The military situation makes Dresden's destruction strategically meaningless. The Red Army continues advancing. The Americans push from the west. Germany faces inevitable defeat within weeks. The transportation network through Dresden is destroyed, but the Germans have no troops left to transport anyway. The industrial capacity is gone, but Germany's war production already collapsed. The destruction of Dresden accomplishes nothing that matters to the war's outcome. But it accomplishes something else. It demonstrates the absolute destructive power of strategic bombing when applied without restraint against urban centers. It shows what happens when the distinction between military targets and civilian populations disappears entirely. It reveals the logical endpoint of total war. The firebombing of Dresden becomes a case study, a warning, a preview of what nuclear weapons will make possible just months later at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Nazi propaganda ministry attempts to exploit Dresden's destruction. Goebbels orders newsreels showing the ruins, the corpses, the devastation. He inflates the casualty figures, claiming hundreds of thousands dead, even 500,000. He calls it a terror attack, a war crime, an atrocity against a defenseless cultural city. The propaganda rings hollow, coming from the regime that bombed Warsaw, Rotterdam, London and Coventry. But the images from Dresden proved difficult for the Allies to defend, regardless of their source. Allied authorities initially provide no public comment on the Dresden raid. Military. Communiques report successful operations against transportation targets in eastern Germany. The civilian casualties are not mentioned. The cultural destruction is not acknowledged. The firestorm is described as an unfortunate but necessary side effect of attacking military objectives. The justifications satisfy no one who sees the photographs or hears the survivor testimonies. The city transforms into a symbol. For Germans, Dresden represents Allied brutality and the victors' willingness to destroy German culture and kill German civilians without military justification. For the Allies, it becomes an uncomfortable reminder that the moral clarity of fighting fascism does not excuse every action taken in that fight. For future generations, Dresden joins Guernica and Hiroshima as names that carry weight beyond their geographic and historical specifics. Life continues in the ruins because it must. Survivors create shelters in damaged buildings. They scavenge for food, for fuel, for anything useful in the debris. They establish primitive living arrangements in cellars and partially intact structures. They begin the impossible task of rebuilding lives in a landscape that resembles the surface of the moon more than a human city. One survivor later testifies, "We became animals in those days after the bombing, fighting over scraps, sleeping in holes, forgetting what it meant to be civilized people living civilized lives." A doctor working in the ruins writes, I treated wounds I had no names for, caused by weapons designed by human beings against other human beings, and I lost all faith that our species deserves to survive what we inflict upon ourselves. The Red Army reaches Dresden on May the 8th, 1945. They find a dead city occupied by ghosts. The war ends the same day. Victory in Europe brings no celebration to Dresden. Only silence, only ash, only memory of what was lost and can never be recovered. The true death toll from the Dresden firestorm will never be known with certainty. The chaos of the attack, the destruction of municipal records, the presence of hundreds of thousands of unregistered refugees, the cremation of tens of thousands of bodies in mass pyres, all combine to make accurate counting impossible. Estimates range from 25,000 to over 135,000 dead. Modern historians generally accept figures between 25,000 and 40,000, though even these numbers remain uncertain. What is certain is that tens of thousands of human beings died in Dresden over 14 hours in February 1945. The military casualties are comparatively light. Several hundred German soldiers die in the attacks, most of them wounded men in military hospitals or troops passing through the railway station. A handful of Allied aircrews are shot down and killed. The vast majority of the dead are civilians, women, children, the elderly, refugees who fled one threat only to die from another, people whose only crime was being in Dresden when the bombers came. The civilian death toll breaks down into categories of horror. Thousands burned to death in the firestorm, trapped in buildings or caught in streets where the heat and flames allow no escape. Their bodies are found charred beyond recognition, reduced to ash and bone fragments, or shriveled to grotesque remnants of human form. Thousands more suffocate when the fires consume all oxygen in their shelters, dying without visible wounds, but just as dead as those who burned. Many drown in the Elbe trying to escape the flames, or freeze to death along its banks in the February cold. Others die from blast effects. High explosive bombs collapse buildings onto people sheltering inside. The concussive force kills without leaving obvious injuries. Internal organs rupture, skulls fracture. Bodies are found intact but lifeless, killed by pressure waves that tear through flesh and bone. Flying debris becomes shrapnel that decapitates, dismembers, and eviscerates victims caught in the open. The injured outnumber the dead by substantial margins. Estimates suggest 100,000 or more people suffer injuries ranging from minor to fatal. Burns cover the majority of casualties. First-degree burns affect thousands who escape with painful but survivable injuries. Second- and third-degree burns affect tens of thousands more. Many of these victims die in the days and weeks following the attack from infection, shock, or systemic failure, as burned tissue overwhelms their body's ability to heal. Respiratory injuries kill hundreds in the aftermath. Inhaling superheated air sears lungs and airways. Victims survive the initial attack only to die slowly as damaged tissue fails to provide oxygen. Others breathe toxic fumes from burning chemicals, plastics, and materials never meant to combust. Their lungs fill with fluid. They drown internally days after the bombing ends. Crush injuries affect thousands trapped beneath collapsed buildings. Broken bones, internal bleeding, severed limbs. Many lie buried for hours or days before rescue. Others are never found alive. Those pulled from rubble often die despite rescue efforts due to shock, blood loss, or infection from contaminated wounds. The psychological casualties cannot be quantified, but affect everyone who survives. Shell shock, trauma, breakdown of mental faculties under stress beyond human tolerance. Survivors wander the ruins in catatonic states, unable to process what they experienced. Children stop speaking. Adults lose touch with reality. The mental wounds inflicted by the firestorm will persist for decades in those who lived through it. The refugee population suffers disproportionately. Exact numbers remain unknown because no accurate count existed even before the bombing. Estimates suggest 200,000 to 500,000 refugees crowd into Dresden in early February. Many of these people have no shelter except temporary accommodations in schools, churches, and public buildings. When the bombs fall, they die in large groups, entire communities wiped out in single shelters. Among the dead are thousands of children, infants in their mothers' arms, toddlers holding parents' hands as they flee burning buildings, school-aged children separated from families in the chaos, teenagers pressed into civil defense work who die trying to fight fires or rescue others. No age provides immunity from the firestorm. The young die alongside the old, the innocent alongside everyone else. The elderly suffer particularly high mortality rates. Many cannot move quickly enough to escape collapsing buildings or advancing flames. Others refuse to leave homes they occupied for decades. They sit in familiar chairs and wait for death rather than flee into chaos. Their bodies are found in apartments, in shelters, in streets where they collapsed from exhaustion or despair. Women comprise a large percentage of casualties. With most military-age men at the front, Dresden's population skews heavily female. Mothers die protecting children. Nurses die treating wounded. Firefighters die fighting impossible blazes. Teachers die sheltering students. The firestorm makes no distinction between combatants and non-combatants because almost everyone in Dresden is a non-combatant. The destruction of families is total for thousands. Entire households die together in shelters, parents and children, grandparents, extended families sharing cellars for warmth and supposed safety. The bombs and fire kill them all at once, leaving no survivors to mourn, no one to remember their names. Whole family lines end in a single night. The orphans number in the thousands. Children who survive but lose both parents, who emerge from shelters to find their families gone, who search the ruins calling names no one answers. These children become wards of an overwhelmed and collapsing state. Many end up in refugee camps. Others are taken in by surviving relatives, if any can be found. Some simply disappear into the chaos of post-war Germany. The missing outnumber even the dead for weeks. Families search desperately for loved ones who might have survived. They check shelters. They search among the wounded. They examine bodies when possible. Most searches end without answers. The missing remain missing. Whether dead or fled or lost in the confusion, their fates stay unknown. Property destruction reaches near total in the city centre. Approximately 39,000 residential buildings are destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Over 75,000 apartments become uninhabitable. Hundreds of thousands of people lose their homes and all possessions. The material wealth accumulated over lifetimes vanishes in hours. Wedding photographs, family heirlooms, children's toys, everything burns. The cultural losses prove incalculable. Libraries holding books, dating back centuries, burn completely. The Saxon State Library loses hundreds of thousands of volumes. Museum collections are destroyed. The Zwinger Palace art galleries lose paintings, sculptures, and artifacts irreplaceable by any measure. The Green Vault treasure chamber survives, but much of its content was previously evacuated. What remains in Dresden's museums largely perishes in the flames. Religious sites suffer comprehensive destruction. Churches that served Dresden's spiritual life for generations are gutted or demolished. The Frauenkirche Cathedral collapses. The Kreuzkirche is destroyed. The Katholische Hofkirche is heavily damaged. Centuries of religious art, sacred objects, and architectural beauty disappear. The spiritual landmarks that oriented Dresden's residents through space and time are gone. Industrial infrastructure is obliterated. Factories, workshops, the railway marshalling yards, bridges across the Elbe, roads, utility systems. The economic foundation of the city ceases to exist. Dresden's ability to function as an urban centre ends with the bombing. What emerges later is built on the ruins, not rebuilt from what survived. The total cost in human suffering defies quantification. How do you measure the value of a mother who burns to death protecting her infant? What number captures the loss of a child who suffocates calling for parents who are already dead? How do you calculate the worth of 7 centuries of culture and beauty reduced to ash? The statistics tell one story. The individual experiences tell another that numbers cannot contain. One Red Cross volunteer later writes, "I recorded names, ages, and locations of bodies until the lists became meaningless, until I realized we were counting souls as if they were inventory, reducing human beings to numbers on forms that no one would ever read." A teenage survivor recalls decades later, "I am 90 years old now, and not a day passes that I do not see the burning city, smell the smoke, hear the screams. We did not die in Dresden, but we did not survive either. We exist between those two states, never fully alive again." The human cost of Dresden cannot be measured in casualties alone. It must be measured in destroyed lives, shattered families, traumatized survivors, lost futures, and questions that have no satisfying answers. The numbers tell us how many died. They cannot tell us what was lost when they died. Dresden occupies a unique and controversial place in the history of World War II. The bombing achieves nothing strategically significant. By February 1945, Germany's defeat is inevitable and imminent. The Red Army stands 120 kilometers from Dresden and advances daily. The Western Allies close from the opposite direction. The Reich has weeks, perhaps days, left to exist. The transportation infrastructure through Dresden matters little when Germany has no functioning army left to transport. The industrial capacity means nothing when the regime cannot feed its population or fuel its remaining military units. Yet, the destruction of Dresden demonstrates something profoundly important about the nature of modern warfare. It shows what industrial nations can accomplish when they commit total resources to annihilation. The firebombing proves that cities can be destroyed as completely and efficiently as armies, that civilian populations offer no more protection than military formations when strategic bombing is applied without restraint, that the weapons and tactics developed during 6 years of total war make possible destruction on scales previously unimaginable. The Dresden raid represents the culmination of strategic bombing doctrine that evolved throughout the war. The British begin with precision attacks on military and industrial targets. Losses prove unsustainable. Accuracy proves impossible with available technology. The doctrine shifts toward area bombing. Cities become targets. Civilian morale becomes a legitimate objective. The distinction between combatants and non-combatants erodes until it disappears entirely. Hamburg burns in 1943, Cologne burns, Berlin burns repeatedly. Dozens of German cities experience what Dresden experiences, though perhaps not with such intensity in such a brief period. The Americans initially resist area bombing, insisting on precision daylight raids against specific targets, but they, too, adapt their tactics. By 1945, American bombers drop incendiaries on Japanese cities with the explicit goal of burning them to ash. Tokyo's firebombing in March 1945 kills more people than Dresden. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August represent the logical endpoint of this progression. Dresden becomes symbolic precisely because it occurs so late in the war, against a target of limited military value, with such devastating effect. The moral questions surrounding strategic bombing crystallize around this single raid in ways they do not around earlier attacks on more obviously military targets. Was it necessary? Was it justified? Did it shorten the war? Did it save Allied lives by convincing Germany to surrender sooner? Or was it simply revenge disguised as strategy? Punishment inflicted because the Allies possessed the power to inflict it and Germany could not retaliate? These questions have no consensus answers, 75 years later. Military historians argue about Dresden's strategic value. Some point to the railway junction, the troop movements, the industrial facilities as legitimate targets. Others note that precision attacks on those specific objectives would have accomplished more with less civilian cost. moral philosophers debate whether anything can justify the deliberate creation of a firestorm in a city centre crowded with refugees. Political analysts examine Churchill's motivations, Stalin's demands, the complex alliance politics that influence targeting decisions. The German memory of Dresden evolves through distinct phases. Initially, Nazi propaganda exploits the destruction for anti-Allied messaging. After the war, East Germany under Soviet occupation uses Dresden as evidence of Western brutality while downplaying Soviet actions in Eastern Germany. The ruins of the Frauenkirche are left standing as a memorial to capitalist aggression. West Germany struggles with how to remember Dresden, without seeming to claim moral equivalence between Allied bombing and Nazi crimes. After reunification, Dresden reconstruction begins. The Frauenkirche is rebuilt using original stones where possible and completed in 2005, exactly 60 years after its destruction. The reconstruction becomes a symbol of reconciliation, of rebuilding, of moving forward while remembering the past. The restored cathedral stands as both memorial to what was lost and testament to what can be recovered. The Allied memory proves equally complicated. British and American veterans defend the Dresden raid as militarily necessary and morally justified given the context of total war against Nazi Germany. They point to German bombing of Coventry, Rotterdam and London. They note that Germany pioneered area bombing and firestorm tactics. They argue that Dresden's destruction contributed to ending a war that killed millions and would have killed millions more if prolonged. Critics, including some Allied participants, question whether the end of the war justified the means employed at Dresden. They note the timing so close to Germany's inevitable surrender. They question the necessity of 3 separate attacks over 14 hours. They point to the disproportionate civilian casualties compared to military effect. They argue that Dresden represents a moment when the Allies descended to methods indistinguishable from those they condemned in their enemies. The debate continues because Dresden forces confrontation with uncomfortable truths about modern warfare. That good causes do not guarantee good methods. That fighting monsters does not prevent becoming monstrous yourself. That victory carries moral costs not erased by military success. That technological capability tempts use regardless of ethical considerations. That civilians always suffer most in wars supposedly fought between armies. Dresden's legacy extends beyond historical debate into cultural memory, literature, film, and art. Kurt Vonnegut's novel Slaughterhouse-Five introduces Dresden to generations who might otherwise forget. Films depict the bombing from various perspectives. Memorials in Dresden and elsewhere mark what happened. Annual commemorations occur each February the 13th. Far-right groups attempt to exploit the memory for nationalist purposes. Anti-fascist groups counter-protest. The politics of memory remain contested. What lessons does Dresden teach? That total war recognizes no limits until participants impose them on themselves. That technology enables destruction faster than ethics evolved to constrain it. That distinguishing military necessity from revenge becomes impossible when hatred and fear dominate decision-making. That cities built over centuries can be erased in hours. That human beings, given sufficient motivation and means, will inflict almost unlimited suffering on other human beings. The uncensored footage from Dresden preserves testimony that words cannot fully convey. The images show what strategic bombing means in concrete, specific, undeniable terms. The piles of bodies, the shriveled corpses, the endless rubble, the survivors' faces. These images resist sanitization, resist abstraction, resist the comfortable distance that allows war to seem clean and surgical and necessary. As one historian later reflects, Dresden teaches us that the question is never whether we can destroy our enemies utterly, but whether we should, and whether in doing so we destroy something essential in ourselves that cannot be rebuilt like a cathedral. The ruins of Dresden stand as warning and reminder. War's logic leads here, to firestorms, to mass graves, to children burning, to cities transformed into ash. Technology makes it possible, fear makes it seem necessary, and only afterward, when the bombs stop falling and the fires burn out, do we confront what we have done and ask whether it was worth the cost we made others pay. The answer remains unresolved. The question remains urgent, and the images from Dresden refuse to let us forget what happens when the boundary between military action and mass annihilation disappears entirely